What if Lionel Messi didn't just create football history? What if he completely destroyed every record we thought was impossible? Imagine this. A player who already completed the biggest dream in football returns years later and wins the World Cup again. Back-to-back 2 World Cups. 2 generations watching the same player dominate the biggest stage on earth. If Messi did this, football would not just celebrate a champion. The entire definition of greatness would change forever. The GOAT debate would enter a new level. Future superstars would have a mountain nobody could climb, and the world would witness one of the greatest sporting stories ever created. But what would actually happen if Messi won back-to-back World Cups? How would football change? How would Argentina change? And would anyone ever be able to challenge Messi's legacy again? Before we start, if you believe Messi is already the greatest footballer ever, comment Messi GOAT below. And subscribe for more football stories, predictions, and future football scenarios. If Lionel Messi somehow managed to win back-to-back World Cups, football history would enter a completely new chapter. The question would no longer be whether Messi is one of the greatest players ever. The question would become, did we witness the greatest football story that will ever exist? For years, Messi carried a pressure unlike any other player in football history, because talent was never the question. Everyone knew what Messi could do. The goals, the assists, the impossible dribbles, the moments where he made football look like a different sport. But there was always one thing missing. The World Cup, the one trophy that decided how the world judged football greatness. Every tournament came with the same question. Can Messi finally do it? Can he bring the trophy home? And every time Argentina fell short, the criticism became louder. Some people ignored everything he achieved. The league titles, the Champions League victories, the individual awards. They only looked at one thing, the World Cup. Then came 2022. A tournament where Messi didn't just play football, he created history. Every match felt like another chapter in the final story. The pressure, the emotion, the leadership, the moments of magic. And when Argentina finally lifted the trophy, millions of fans believed they had seen the ending. The perfect ending. But imagine if that wasn't the ending. Imagine if that was only the beginning of something even bigger. Because winning the World Cup once makes you a champion. Winning it twice changes your entire place in history. Look at football legends. Every generation has players who become symbols of greatness, players who define an era. But a back-to-back World Cup victory would put Messi into a category almost nobody could ever reach. Think about what that would mean. A player winning the biggest tournament on earth, not during one lucky moment. Not because of one perfect tournament, but across 2 different generations, against different opponents, different tactics, different challenges. That would prove something powerful. That Messi wasn't just part of a great team, he was the reason history happened. And the most unbelievable part, a second World Cup would completely change how people talk about Messi. Because football debates have always focused on different things. Some fans talk about goals, some talk about trophies, some talk about individual awards, some talk about influence. But the World Cup has always had a special place. It is where legends become immortal. A second World Cup would become the final argument for many fans. The moment where the debate changes from, is Messi the greatest, to, long will it take before football sees someone like him again? The impact would also go far beyond Messi himself. Argentina would experience something almost impossible, because football in Argentina is not just a sport. It is identity. It is emotion. It connects generations. A single World Cup can inspire millions. But 2 consecutive World Cups, that creates a football culture. Young children watching Messi lift trophies would grow up believing that greatness is possible. The next generation of Argentine players would not just dream about playing for their country. They would dream about continuing Messi's legacy. Because every football nation needs a symbol, a player who represents an entire era. For Argentina, Messi would become more than a captain, more than a superstar. He would become the face of their football history. But there is another side to this. A second World Cup would create an impossible standard for future players, because once someone reaches that level, everyone after them gets compared. Every young superstar would face the same question: Can he become the next Messi? Players like Kylian Mbappe, Erling Haaland, Vinicius Jr., and the next generation of talents would not just compete against each other. They would compete against a legacy, and that is the hardest opponent in football. Not another player, not another team. History itself. A back-to-back World Cup victory would also change the way football sees age, because modern football is constantly searching for the next young superstar. Speed, athleticism, physical power. But Messi's success would remind everyone of something important. Football is not only about physical ability, it is about intelligence, vision, decision-making, understanding the game at a level nobody else can. It would prove that football's greatest weapon is still the human mind, the ability to see a pass nobody else sees, to create a moment nobody expected, to change a match with one touch. And maybe that is why Messi's story is so different. Because football is changing. Technology is entering the game. Tactics are becoming more complex. Players are becoming stronger and faster. But imagination still wins. Creativity still matters. Magic still exists. And Messi winning another World Cup would be the ultimate proof that even in the most modern version of football, one extraordinary player can still change everything. Now imagine the final moment. The stadium is full. The world is watching. The final whistle arrives. Messi stands there again. Another trophy. Another celebration. Another image that millions of people will remember forever. A player who spent years chasing the dream, completed it, and then somehow found a way to complete it again. That would not just be a football achievement. That would become one of the greatest stories in sports history. Because some players win, some players dominate, but very few players create moments that define generations. And if Messi won back-to-back World Cups, football would never look at greatness the same way again. The debate around football greatness has existed for decades. Every generation creates a new hero. Every era has a player who becomes the face of the sport. And every time a superstar appears, the world starts asking the same question. Is this the greatest player we have ever seen? But if Lionel Messi won back-to-back World Cups, that question would completely change. Because football greatness is not only measured by talent, it is measured by moments. And the biggest moments in football history happen on the World Cup stage. For years, the debate between Messi, Cristiano Ronaldo, Maradona, and Pelé has divided football fans around the world. Every side has their argument. Some point to goals, some point to trophies, some point to longevity, some point to pure talent. And honestly, every legend has something that makes their story special. But the World Cup has always carried a different weight. Because club football shows consistency, but the World Cup shows legacy. It is the place where one tournament can define an entire career. A player can spend 20 years building greatness, but one World Cup moment can decide how history remembers them. That is why Messi's 2022 victory was so important. It completed the final missing piece. But winning again, that would create a level of dominance football has almost never seen. A back-to-back World Cup victory would not just add another trophy. It would completely rewrite the meaning of greatness. Because winning once can sometimes be explained by timing, a perfect team, a perfect tournament, a perfect run. But winning twice, especially in different World Cup cycles, that shows something deeper. It shows adaptation, leadership, mental strength, the ability to perform when the entire world is watching. And that is what separates legends from icons. Imagine the pressure Messi would face entering another World Cup. The first time, he was chasing the dream. The second time, he would be protecting history. Every opponent would want to stop him. Every team would prepare differently. Every match would feel like a final, because when you are the champion, everyone wants to defeat you. The target on your back becomes bigger. The pressure becomes heavier. But that is exactly what makes the achievement almost impossible. And if Messi succeeded under those conditions, the story would become even greater. The GOAT debate would also transform because future generations would look at Messi differently. Young fans who never experienced the early years of his career would not just see highlights, they would see a complete story. A player who dominated club football, a player who changed how people understood creativity, a player who carried his country, a player who won the biggest prize, then returned and did it again. That type of story becomes bigger than statistics. Because numbers can be broken, records can be beaten, but legendary moments live forever. And then comes the biggest question. What would happen to football after Messi? Because every era eventually ends, and every legend leaves behind a challenge. When one player reaches a level that feels impossible, the next generation has to decide, do they chase the legacy, or do they create their own? Players like Mbappe, Haaland, Vinicius Jr., Bellingham, and future stars would enter a new football world. A world where the standard has been raised, because Messi's success would create a new definition of greatness. Scoring goals would not be enough. Winning trophies would not be enough. The next generation would be judged by impact, by moments, by whether they can carry the pressure of an entire nation. Because that is what Messi's story represents. Not just ability, responsibility. But Messi winning another World Cup would also change the way countries build teams, because it would remind everyone of the importance of having a true leader. Modern football is becoming more tactical every year. Teams focus on systems, data, physical preparation. But sometimes football still comes down to one player creating something nobody planned. One player changing the entire direction of a match. And Messi has always represented that. The unexpected, the impossible, the moment that nobody sees coming. Now think about Argentina, because the impact would go beyond one trophy. Argentina's football identity would become connected with one name forever, just like Brazil has Pelé, just like Argentina had Maradona. A back-to-back World Cup, Messi would create a legacy that would define generations. Children would grow up watching his final moments. They would imitate his celebrations. They would wear his number. They would dream of becoming the next player who creates history. That is the power of football legends. They do not only win, they inspire. But there is another possibility. A second World Cup could also create one of the biggest debates in sports history. Because some people would ask, is this the greatest achievement ever achieved by a footballer? Could anyone realistically repeat it? Could any future player handle that level of pressure? And that is what makes the idea so fascinating. Because football is full of impossible moments, records that seemed untouchable, stories nobody expected, and then one player comes along and changes everything. A back-to-back World Cup victory would also prove something about Messi's style of football, because football has changed dramatically. Players are faster, defenders are stronger, tactics are more advanced. Every team studies every detail. But Messi's greatest weapon was never just speed, it was understanding. His ability to read the game before it happened, to make decisions faster than everyone else, to create solutions when there seemed to be none. And if that type of player dominated 2 World Cups, it would send a message to future football. The mind can still defeat the machine, and maybe that would be the most beautiful part of the story. Because Messi's career has always been about overcoming doubt, too small, too quiet. Not enough for his country, not enough without a World Cup. The criticism followed him for years, but every chapter ended with Messi proving people wrong, and a second World Cup would be the final answer. Not through words, not through arguments, but through history. Because at the end of the day, football is remembered through stories, not just statistics, not just numbers. Stories. And a story about Messi winning back-to-back World Cups would become one of the greatest stories football has ever produced. A story about pressure, a story about patience, a story about a player who kept chasing greatness until greatness became his name. Football has always evolved. Every generation changes the way the game is played. Different tactics, different styles, different types of players. But some players do more than succeed in their era. They influence the future of football itself. And if Messi won back-to-back World Cups, the impact would not stop with trophies. It would change how the world sees football. For years, modern football has been moving in one direction. More speed, more physicality, more data, more technology. Teams are becoming machines. Every movement is analyzed. Every mistake is studied. Every player is measured by numbers. But Messi's success would send a powerful message. That football is still about creativity, still about imagination, still about a player seeing something that nobody else can see. Because even in the most advanced version of football, there is still room for magic. Imagine young players around the world watching Messi lift 2 World Cups. They would not only copy his skills, they would study his mind, how he moves, how he creates space, how he controls the pressure. Because Messi represents a different type of greatness. He was never only about physical dominance. He was about intelligence. A player who could change a game with one decision, one pass, one touch, one moment. And if that player achieved back-to-back World Cup success, coaches around the world would look at football differently. They would search for creativity again. They would develop players who can think faster, not just run faster, but the biggest change would happen among the next generation of superstars, because football after Messi would enter a completely new challenge. The players coming after him would not just be compared to other players. They would be compared to history. Every young talent would carry a question. Can he become the next Messi? And that is an impossible expectation, because replacing a legend is not about ability, it is about creating your own story. Players like Mbappe, Haaland, Vinicius Jr., Bellingham, and future stars would have a completely different journey. They would not just chase trophies, they would chase moments, because Messi's legacy would prove something important. Football remembers the players who appear when the world is watching. A great player can score hundreds of goals, but a legendary player creates memories that last forever. A second World Cup would also change how fans experience football, because the story would become bigger than the sport itself. People who do not even follow football would know about it, the same way people remember historic moments in other sports, because some achievements become part of global culture. A player winning 2 World Cups in a row would become one of those moments. Decades later, people would still talk about where they were when Messi completed the impossible. But there is also something emotional about this story. Because Messi's journey was never simple. It was filled with criticism, doubt, painful defeats. Moments where people questioned him. But that is what makes the story powerful. Because greatness is not only about winning, it is about what happens before you win. The struggles, the failures, the moments where giving up would have been easier, and Messi's entire career has been about continuing anyway. Now imagine the final chapter, the 2026 World Cup. The world knows this could be Messi's last chance. Every stadium, every camera, every fan, watching one more possible masterpiece, and then the final whistle, another trophy, another celebration, another image that becomes football history. Messi standing with 2 World Cups, a moment that nobody thought was possible. At that point, the conversation would no longer be about comparisons, because some achievements are bigger than debates. They become history. They become stories people tell. They become moments that define an entire generation. But maybe the biggest question is not whether Messi could win another World Cup. The bigger question is, would football ever see something like this again? Because the difficulty is almost unimaginable. To win 1 World Cup, you need talent. You need teamwork. You need luck. You need the perfect moment. To win 2, you need all of that again. Against a completely different world. Different opponents, different challenges, different pressure. That is what would make it legendary. A back-to-back World Cup Messi would represent the perfect combination. Talent, leadership, mental strength, consistency, and the ability to perform when everything is on the line. That is why this scenario fascinates football fans, because it is not just about winning trophies, it is about witnessing history being created in real time. Maybe one day another player will come, maybe another genius will appear, maybe someone will break records that seem impossible today. That is the beauty of football. It always creates new stories, but some stories become almost impossible to repeat. And Messi winning back-to-back World Cups would be one of them, because legends win, champions succeed. But icons change the way the world remembers the game. And if Lionel Messi lifted 2 World Cups, football would not just remember a player who won. Football would remember a player who changed the meaning of greatness forever. Maybe football will produce another genius. Maybe another player will break records. Maybe another superstar will rise. But a story like Messi winning back-to-back World Cups, a player who spent his entire career chasing the biggest dream, then returning and doing it again, that would be something completely different, because legends win trophies. But icons change history, so the question remains, If Messi won 2 World Cups in a row, would anyone ever be able to break that legacy? Comment your answer below.